nobody, myself included, expected to run into what I've ran into on this job. But being the person who can help my customers get through this, not only on the job, but from an emotional and a financial perspective, ensuring that you can help them in any way that they need is really, really important. What's going on, everyone? Welcome to another episode of the Midweek Modern Craftsman. Hopefully you guys are having another good week. It's the middle of summer, which is slightly depressing. I know I had spoken about this before, but summer is just flying by. I'm ready for some nice summer weather. It's still hot and humid and raining and wet, but summer's been pretty good so far. The girls just started camp last week full time. 1 or 2 weeks ago, I think they go to a local camp. It's a YMCA camp. Selby actually does a week of sleepaway camp there as well, but it's super cool. They're outside all day long, obviously, unless it rains. I think even if it rains, they're essentially outside, just under cover. It's out in the tail end of Medford, out towards Chemung, so it's essentially in the Pine Barrens. Like an outdoors type of camp. They swim, they kayak, paddleboard, they do archery. There's all sorts of I think they have like a rock climbing and a ropes course. Just a super cool camp for them. They come home very tired. It's the type of camp that I wish I had gone to as a child, but unfortunately, I was one of 5 and my parents were not going to pay for us to go to camp every year. But it's funny, it's very expensive. So we end up paying for it over the course of the year. You're just on a payment plan. So instead of paying just for it during summer, you start as soon as camp ends, you figure out how many weeks they want, and you start paying that monthly throughout the course of the year, just so it doesn't hit quite as hard. But we were at one of our friends' 40th birthday parties this weekend. Shout out to Brad. Happy birthday, Brad. The big 40. You make it look good, man. Obviously, my friends are a lot older than me, and Rachel, we're not there yet. But we were talking to one of his friends there, and we were talking about how expensive camp was. And she was like, we send my kids to this Christian camp, and we drove by it, Rachel and I, actually last week, and we were like, yo, that camp looks so nice. And it turns out she sent her kids there, and she's like, the only weird thing they do is just make them like stand for 30 minutes and they have prayer at that point. So I just tell my kids, just do what you want on your own time. Meditate, excuse me. You don't have to necessarily pray. I just screwed that up so badly. She said that there's 30 minutes where they stand and pray. And she said to her kids, you don't have to do that if you're uncomfortable doing that. You can just stand and meditate or do your own thing at that point. But she's like, other than that, it's half the cost of every other camp, and they like it a lot. So we were cracking up because we had just driven by there and we're like, that camp was super nice. And then this friend was like, yeah, we basically switched to that camp because it costs half the cost of the other camp. And the only downside is that they have to pray. So if that's not your thing, obviously, that may be weird for your children if they do not have a religious upbringing, to be like, hey, you're at summer camp and now you have a half hour we have to stand and pray. But I thought that was pretty funny. But yeah, this camp's super cool. They have a family night that we go to once a year too, where we get to check out what they do, meet their counselors. They love it. Selby does the week of sleepaway, which they basically no cell phones, no watches, no tablets, nothing. And they're completely disconnected from everyone for a week. They sleep in very primitive cabins with no air conditioning. They're up early, stay up late. It's super cool for them. I'm very jealous. I spend a lot of my weekends out in the woods there doing not the same thing, but similar stuff at this point at 37 years old. And to have an opportunity to do that at Tilly just turned 7 and Selby will be 10 this fall is pretty cool. Speaking of ages and birthdays, Tilly just had her birthday last week, July 14th. She turned 7, We took her to a Phillies game. We dodged a bit of weather. It was supposed to storm, but it didn't storm. It was very hot and humid. But we had a good time at the game. She made it onto the big screen. My father-in-law's birthday is also July 14th. So we brought my in-laws, and then Tilly brought 3 of her friends. Rachel, obviously, Selby, and she got up on the Jumbotron for her birthday. So she was pretty pumped. Phillies played like shit, and they ended up winning 3 against the Padres after that. But big birthday weekend, big 7. She had a good time. It was nice for her to get to. It was the first year that she had a birthday party where she really got to pick her friends and was just all inclusive, everyone in her class. And we did something special that she wanted to do. So we got her a little Bryce Harper jersey because she likes Bryce Harper, and went to the game on Friday night. It was also a fireworks night and drone show. So pretty cool. I had never seen a drone show, but essentially they program a ton of drones to fly in whatever pattern they want, and they were able to do the Phillies logo, the flag, the Liberty Bell, players. They recreated players from when the Phillies won pennants and from when they won the World Series. It was super neat to see that. What they can do with the drones and the way that they move them. It's not just two-dimensional. Like, they actually shift them and rotate them, which was very cool. The fireworks were good. Longer than I had anticipated. I thought, since it was essentially a free fireworks show with the tickets, that it would be cheap and quick, but they did a nice job. It was fun. The girls had fun. We told Tilly that we got her the fireworks for her birthday. Obviously she caught on to our lies, but yeah, it was a good weekend. We had fun. It's always nice being able to spoil them a little bit extra and celebrate them and see how they feel another year older as soon as they wake up. So do you feel different now? Does it feel different brushing your teeth now? And they always say yes. Little do they know, as you get older, it's just another day. But it's so much fun to celebrate at this age, at 7, where it's just such a huge day for them. It's reminiscent of when you were a kid, and it brings back a lot of that innocence and joy. So we had fun celebrating little Tilly this past weekend. So on to my project. Let me pull up this blog post real quickly. So I'm sure all of you guys and girls have been following along on this project that is spiraled shortly after demolition. Demolition went fairly well and ran into a couple things, but nothing major. And it wasn't until after demolition, like the bulk of demolition, that we started running into all these issues. So there was a leak on the second floor where they had a door directly on the fiberglass roof deck, and they didn't have a curb there. So there's no way to flash in that fiberglass underneath the door, a hip roof tied into that. So basically all the water coming down the roof, leaking under the door, down into the first floor. So when we started investigating that leak, because that wasn't in our initial scope, right before the project started, the customer was like, hey, we didn't get a chance to fix that. Can you look at that? So when we opened up that ceiling, I covered a bunch of just weird structural deficiencies. And then at that point, we were like, I think that we should open up the kitchen ceiling. We were just going to relocate some lights. And the ceiling was pretty flat and level, so we weren't going to do anything. Turns out the ceiling was not flat and level. They had just furred down and created an additional ceiling over the original ceiling that was hiding more issues. Then when we went to replace some windows and move some windows around, we found a bunch of water damage behind the stucco and the window flashings. And then once we got the kitchen ceiling demoed, found that the roof's leaking. A lot of the hip roof, it doesn't have the correct step flashing, counter flashing, kick out flashings. And it's like, all right, so where do we take this, right? Ideally, I replace that roof, but if I'm not fixing anything above that roof, I'm owning those leaks, even though they could be coming in from flashing on a window and then going down the wall behind our flashings because the flashings on the windows aren't right. And then you have this brand new kitchen, it's leaking into the kitchen, even though we spent all this money replacing the roof. So the conversations have been, how is this going to impact budget? How far do you want to take this? Um, is the damage um centralized and located just in this area, which I do not believe that it is. But at some point, we have to end our scope of work. We can't go around and replace the whole house, um, at least not right now while the customers are living there. Or sorry, the customers are moved out, and we're remodeling a portion of their first floor. So after the original demo was done, we found all these structural deficiencies, and then last week, so what I intended to do, right? The initial scope was this kitchen remodel. Um, we have a slight lounge renovation, refinishing the first floor flooring, and then some paint work, carpet runners, but there's light remodeling where I could get inspections on the kitchen. Um, and move ahead with the project. So when we found out that this sunken sunroom needed some structural work in off of the kitchen, which wasn't in our initial scope, I was like, "Hey, I can get all my inspections on the kitchen. I can get my subs in. We can get insulated, closed in drywallers there, prime. Start getting the floor guy there. He can start installing the new flooring, refinishing the other flooring. Worst case, this area off the kitchen can just be completely separate. I'll get the steel beam in there. I'll get partial inspections on everything else. The engineer will sign off on that. I'll get the inspector if he wants to see that, and just treat that as a separate renovation. A little bit more work for me because I'm twice the amount of inspections. But at least the bulk of the project is continuing, right? So even the flooring, it's like, hey, the floor contractor is going to come back and do one more screen coat and refinish at the end of the project. So worst case, he can come in and refinish that floor like it's a one room refinish at that point. And at least I'll keep the job moving. I knew that we had some rotted sheathing on that porch when I had the stucco removed. I know that the fiberglass roofing above that has some issues, and the railing, excuse me here. So I knew that I had work in and around there. I knew it was leaking, but I didn't anticipate it being as bad as it was. So when I pulled off the sheathing, it had rotted through the structure. Essentially, the tops of the windows weren't as bad, but that's where the water was getting in, and then it was coming down to the bottom, and they had the bottoms of all the windows caulked. Um, they didn't have any paper underneath the sill pan flat. Well, there was no sill pan flashing. So the window flange was installed, and then they had their building paper just on top of the window flange. The window flange was nailed tight to the wall. So really where the damage was, because they caulked the bottoms of the windows and then they caulked the stucco where it transitioned to their veneer stone foundation, all of the water just sat inside of there. It was also sitting on a double wide brick wall that was not helping because that was just holding the moisture like a sponge. So everything from below the windows to this double wide brick wall that was covered in stucco was rotted out, molded. I had Justin go in. I was like, I don't think this is going to be good on the inside. So I had him pull a piece of trim on the inside, and it's like a faux wainscoting where they took drywall, that's the panel, and then they put one by trim over it in a Craftsman style wainscoting. So the drywall is painted as the panel, and he pulled one piece of trim off, and like the drywall panel is perfectly fine where there's paint, and then where they didn't prime the drywall at all behind the trim. So like they installed the trim on raw drywall, they didn't prime it first. Where they didn't prime it, it was just black mold everywhere. Um, so at that point, being that the structure was rotted through and there was really no way to fix that, we were like, all right, let's reframe this wall. So we went to pull the windows, and the windows had leaked for so long that they blew apart when we went to remove them. So there's no the idea was to pull them, clean them up, reinstall them. which we were able to do with the kitchen windows, which the original scope was not pulling them, but they didn't have any flashing. So now that we're putting stucco back up again, I had to make sure that they were flashed correctly. So we pulled 3 windows in the kitchen, 4 windows replaced, put them in, and we're able to salvage them. These 4 windows on this sunroom area, not able to be salvaged. So at this point, I'm like, this whole wall's coming out. We opened up the back addition of the house. There's no back on the house for this 20 by 10 foot sunroom addition. Support beam, I put a temp support beam in. We pulled the wall, pulled down that double wide brick wall, because the initially the plate was on top of that for the wall. The problem was they just had a header course in, and they had expanding anchors that had blown the brick out. So when I pulled that out and the brick fell off, I realized that they just had a double wide brick wall. They didn't fill it solid, and there was no strapping connecting the 2 Ys. So they really weren't doing anything structurally. Basically, you could kick them and they fall over. So we removed them. I ended up putting a row of pancake block in that we set in mortar, tying like below grade the double wide brick wall back together. I think there was maybe 2 courses left that we couldn't get to that were below the slab and below the veneer on the foundation. So we got it down as far as we could, filled that solid with masonry mortar, and then I put down a pancake block, which I epoxied and set our mud sail bolts into, and then built a new wall on top of that. But the issue is now I have to order windows, right? So I intended on reusing these windows, even just the change order work of reframing this wall, ripping the back of the house off, drying it in. I don't have windows. So I can't get the stucco done on the outside of the house because the outside of the house, this is all one. It goes all the way across. It was 2 additions, but now it's all the way across. There's no break in the stucco. So I can't get the stucco done, which is like, how far do I want to take the kitchen? I'm confident that I can dry the kitchen in, but how do I finish a kitchen and then have the stucco people coming back 6-8 weeks later when windows come in and banging around nailing lath up to the exterior on the wall? I'm not thrilled with that. To be finishing the kitchen without gutters on the outside of the house, it's risky. So I'm trying to manage that and figure out how I'm going to do that now. I have some ideas, but everything's been changing so quickly on this job that the most difficult part for me is planning. So I show up to the job and I plan what I'm going to do, and then an hour or 2 into that, I uncover something else and I have to switch gears. Luckily for me, and for Justin, I'm not a huge company, so I don't have a ton of people that I have to keep busy switching gears. Him and I are small enough and efficient enough and well versed enough that I can, we showed up to frame the wall and realized that the brick had to go and we had to set pancake blocks. So within that same day, we threw framing out the window, and I sent him to go pick up the masonry equipment that we would need, materials and tools that we'd need. And I got the block finished that day and was able to frame the wall the next day. So we're getting stuff done, but it's difficult, and it's disappointing, and it's hard. It's just, from a mental standpoint, it's beating me down day in and day out to show up and not be able to get done what I want to do and have to completely um, throw what we're doing out the window and start doing something else, right? To just relinquish what we're doing and start a new task is tough because it's just a hassle. It's a mentality, it's a mindset, and it's frustrating, and it's very mentally taxing. So I'm trying to maintain my spirit, maintain my energy, control the job, keep moving forward. But now this hiccup, I had to cancel inspections because I had rough inspections scheduled. We were ready for electrical, plumbing, and framing, but now I demoed this whole area that wasn't within the scope. And it doesn't make sense to get partials at this point because there's new electrical that has to be removed in order to frame the wall and then reran. Obviously, insulation. I'm not going to like insulate this part and now the ceiling or the roof and the walls. I just want to do it all at once because it's going to cost. It's already costing a lot more money. It would cost even more, and I essentially although I was not on schedule, we were not that far behind schedule considering how much we had ran into and juggling things. But now this really screws me because I couldn't get inspections scheduled. I had to bump them, and it'll probably be another week before I am able to wrap up the framing, the rough electrical, and get an inspection on that and start moving ahead, figuring out what we have to do with engineering, get new as builts done for the inspector. So it really puts us behind. So the other difficulty that I'm having is managing this with the customers. And a lot of people reach out to me and ask, how are you dealing with customers on a renovation where you have six-figure change orders? And that's something that I've never experienced before. I've worked in old homes. Old homes typically breathe fairly well, so even if you have water intrusion, it's not trapped. Even if stucco were done correctly, if everything in this job were not caulked at the bottom, they obviously had leaks, and their solution was to caulk everything. Which once you have water coming in, caulking is the worst thing that you can do because now the water can't get out. So you just make it exponentially worse when you do that. If you didn't caulk things, you still would be having damage, but you wouldn't be trapping water. Is it better? Is it worse? I don't know. The leak could probably go longer without being detected, but at the same time, maybe that's a worse thing because it just feeds mold and it grows longer. Maybe the quick rot and the leaking from day one. But I don't know. Who's to say? Because if we didn't open things up, we would have never known until there was people being sick in the house from mold or a catastrophic failure. And in some of these areas, honestly, we were probably close. Like if if there was a wind load or a tree um fell on the house, or like I don't know, a bad storm with rain or a snow load on this roof, there could have been major issues. I don't think that it's at the point where it's just standing and it's just going to fall one day, but with wind, rain, snow, I think that there was potential for failure there. Um, so the conversation with the customer is that's been difficult because I've never experienced this before, and it at first it was really disappointing to go to them and say, "Hey, we uncovered all these issues with the ceiling." But at this point now, there's been so many issues. I'm trying to limit the damage. Where I'm trying to, I could keep myself busy going around this whole house, but I can't. I have to end somewhere. Whether the rest of the fixes get done now or later, I just have to make sure that our scope and our impact is limited to this area because we've already encroached on other area of the homes that were not within our original scope, and I have to stop somewhere. So the hardest part for me is being able to keep the job moving forward, ordering things to stay ahead of this, the changes, ordering the new doors, the new windows that weren't in the original scope, coordinating with roofing, siding to fix the exterior and the fiberglass roof, but all of that while maintaining the original scope of work. So I'm on the job with the belt on and I'm trying to keep ahead of all the subcontractors, all the changes, all the invoicing changes, managing the budget, managing the schedule, having conversations with the designer, um, and then with the customer as well. So initially I was going to them every day that I ran into an issue, or every few days, where it's just like, hey, here's what we ran into. And at this point now it's like, there's no use in me having a conversation. These aren't changes that we are proposing because it's making for a better finished job, right? Where it's like, hey, you could do this or you cannot do this. You have to do this. I can't put stucco back on the house if the windows aren't flashed correctly. They have to come out. If the framing's rotted, if I can't pass inspections because of the ceiling. So that makes this conversation a little bit easier because you don't have a choice. There's nothing you can do. We can't proceed if you do not elect to fix this. Um, so that makes this conversation a little bit easier, but it's still tough where, I'm going through a few days and I'm figuring out, or I'm exposing all of these issues, and rather than going to the customers right away, I'm waiting 3, 4, 5 days to figure out how bad it is. Um, and I'm not necessarily waiting for answers. When this wall had to come rip out, I just texted the customers and was like, "Hey, sorry, I have to cancel inspections." Sent them a couple of pictures of all the mold damage and was like, "I have to rip off the back of this house." And there's not really much of a choice. We can discuss this financially, how this is going to impact things, but like you can't keep this. There's no way. It's failing. There's mold. Um, we can't put the windows back in. There's just unfortunately there's nothing that can be done except for to fix this. Um, so people are asking me how I'm handling that. How am I handling a job? And like I look at the numbers and we're 50% over our initial budget on this project. When I look at the big picture, right? If it was X amount, we're X amount plus 50% of that X right now. And that's without going above and beyond. That's just fixing from the top plate of the first floor down, some of the roof over the porch, and ideally maybe the hip roof. But like realistically, I would like to go the whole back of the house to make sure that all the windows are flashed, all the flashing around the chimneys all replaced, all the roofing on that area is replaced. Because again, if I fix this hip roof and the issue is the windows and the step flashing below the siding, and I just put new shingles and the windows are too close to the ridge, so there's no way to flash that, like it's going to leak again. It's not like replacing the shingles in the middle of the roof aren't helping the problem. They could last another 20 years. It's every transition from house and siding and flashing to roof. So that's where the issue is. So those are the more difficult conversations where it's like, hey, you can't see this, but this is where this is leaking. And so for me to replace your roof, it needs to be replaced. But if I can't fix what's above that roof, I can't guarantee that that's not going to leak again. So those are the more difficult conversations where it's like, hey, you already have to spend more to fix this roof. That might not fix it. I guarantee it's not going to fix it. It's not going to, there's more issues than that are above it. And I know that 100% with 100% certainty that that's not going to take care of every issue. So, in my opinion, that's not the best use of money. But then it's like, hey, how do we address this? Do we leave it as is, leave it caulked, leave the step flashing, the keyways caulked, it's keeping bulk water out right now, finish the kitchen, and then remodel the exterior in a year from now when you save up? Or do we do the whole back now to make sure that your investment in the kitchen is fine? Or do we touch nothing? Do we just worry about the kitchen and turn a blind eye to this? Like, I have to have those conversations and look at numbers and look at budget and how this impacts schedule and everything else. Those are the more difficult conversations because I'm trying to get work done on the job. Um, the customers aren't living there, so I can't meet them every morning. I can't meet them in the evenings to go over this. So sitting down to draft an email, hop on a phone call, scheduling for the customers to come out and meet in person and then walk this, scheduling meetings with the designer, design manifest. I've been working with Jessica over there to meet and discuss how this has impacted their schedule, what they have lined up, when they have deliveries coming, when the cabinets are delivered, when finishers are coming in, when I actually need materials. It's changing everything. So what I've done as far as financially is to say, hey, if we were to maintain the scope of work where we're basically top plate down, we know the fixes we have to do on the roof above it. Here's number one. If you replace the roof and rip off siding just to replace the step flashing, here's number two. If you do the whole back of the house right now, here's number three. If you do the whole back of the house and the roof everywhere and all the flashing everywhere, here's number four. What makes sense to you? What do you and I've had the conversation with, hey, I understand this is a lot more than your original budget. So I want to make sure that you can afford this. And that's not saying that's not a stab at these people that they don't have the money to do it. But it's like, where's the money coming from? Do you need to pull it from savings? Are you paying a penalty on pulling that from savings? Does it make more sense to go and get a loan to do this? Is it a non-issue? Do you just have the money? Because realistically, like, I think that I should be a part of that because I have their best interest in mind. If it's me waiting a few extra weeks till they can pull money out of one account where they're only paying to capital gains on that and not paying a 30% penalty for pulling out before their retirement, then yeah, like I'll wait 4 weeks, whatever it has to. I'll keep putting work in place to help you out. If it's, hey, we're going to take out a loan for this at this point because it's going to be way over, like, what do I have to do to help them get a closing schedule to borrow that money so that the burden is lessened? It's still a burden, but it's lessened. And I don't want to get into people's financial health and their situations, but I have to ensure that I'm protecting them and in turn protecting me. Protecting my subs. And I'm putting work in place now that I haven't necessarily gotten paid for. And there's a risk factor there. And there's legality there as far as change order work and signing off on. And I understand that. But at some point, you have to, legalities don't, I wouldn't say throw them out the window. And it's a case by case basis, and it depends on how you work with your customers and how you're structured and set up. For me, these changes are non-negotiables. The way that I'm set up, I'm getting paid every 2 weeks. My contract is very clearly defined as to what my scope was, what my rates are, the cost, the plans, everything. And everything's been well documented as far as what's changed through video, through photos, through uh, email, through text, through in-person conversations, following up with emails. That it's, if we had to get all of this rough work done, get the house closed in, and then save money and do finishes later, not that that's going to be what's going to happen, but I'm going to get paid. My subs are going to get paid. Um, the unforeseens are not included. So if the unforeseens eat up my budget and there's no money there, I need to make sure that the customers are aware of that and that there's either a plan in place for now, whether it's financially for now, or if it's 6 months from now, or if it's a year from now, or if it's cutting some of the scope on the back end where it's like, well, let's not refinish the rest of the floors in the house right now. Let's get the kitchen and this back area and the lounge done. And then we'll figure the stairs and the rest of the rooms and the paintwork and all that stuff later when we have a little bit more time to catch our breath and we can get back in the house. Again, this isn't necessarily what's going to happen. For me, I'd like to get it all done now. I'm there, I'm set up. It's tough, but this has to be done for the health and the safety of your family. Um, so it's having the conversations with everyone included, the designers, your subs, yourself, to know what are our options, what are the financial implications of that, how much time is this going to eat up? How far are we behind on schedule, right? Are we 4 weeks behind schedule now? Before we were like a week and a half. Now that I have to cancel inspections and order windows and juggle everything else, it could easily be 4 weeks. So, how's that going to impact everything down the road from this? Um, how's that going to impact subsequent projects for mine? For my subs that I'm bouncing around, right? My hardwood floor was scheduled to be delivered July 12th. It's now July 18th and I don't even have rough inspections done. I don't have windows for the outside of the house even ordered at this point because I just sent them out for pricing today because I ripped the back of the house off and I needed it to get closed in. Um, so these are the conversations that are really important. They're really important to have. They're really important to document. And a lot of times these are face-to-face conversations followed up with an email or a text message, um, ensuring that you trust your customers and your customers trust you. But you also have to ensure that there's money to pay for all of this. And again, this could be with the wealthiest customers in the world. If they're not willing to pay for this or if their money's tied up, you have to know that because you're putting work in place in order to keep the project moving forward. And if you can't get paid, then that's somewhat on you because there's a fine line there with putting work in place and moving ahead and also ensuring that everyone's going to sign off on this. And again, that's a customer case by case, that's a project case by case. A lot of this stuff I haven't really had an opportunity to say, hey, like, we have to rip the back of your house off and close it in. This is the exact cost of this. Do you approve this or not? It's like, no, I can't leave your wall that's rotting apart and has mold throughout the interior. I have to rip that off. Once I rip that off, it's 95 degrees out and it's thunderstorms every single day. I have to close that in. I like that's the pressing issue there for me. So I'm putting work in place at a risk to myself, but I know my customers, um, they have they have we've had the conversation as to financially being able to secure the money. They understand what ballpark to the order of five thousands or tens of thousands of dollars where this is going to cost them and what various options are going to cost them. And we're just trying to move forward as best as possible. But excuse me, real quick. This isn't an easy conversation. These aren't easy conversations. This is not an easy job. This has been a very challenging job. Um, if I were to say anything, I'm moving things forward and I've been juggling a lot. And on the job, I've been handling it as well as I possibly can. Is everything the way that I would do it in a perfect world? No. Are things moving forward? Yes. Are things the way that they need to be in order to be able to stand behind my product? Yes. But if I had a choice, this is not how I would be doing things. Um, it's really, really difficult and really challenging to continue to remove after already putting work in place, right? Where it's like, I now have to replace the windows on the back of the house and I already pulled existing windows and cleaned them and put them back in. And now I'm like, it might at this point, maybe if I were to do it all over, I just would have purchased all new windows for the back of the house, but I didn't know that I needed any. And like at the end of the day, is that extra $4,000 or $5,000 going to make a difference? Would it be better at this point for the longevity of the home to just put all new windows in, rather than reusing windows that are 15 years old? I don't know. That's tough. But it didn't all happen at once. This is not the way that this job is unfolded. The scope has crept to areas that were not in the original contract and touching things that I didn't ever intend on touching. Um, so it's been really hard. And I would say that my biggest Achilles heel right now is probably a bit of a lack of communication with my customers. I am updating them as to what's going on. I know that they're following along with me on social media to see these things. I am keeping them in the loop with anything that I need as far as concerns or questions or looping the designer in. But I'm not getting on a phone call with them every single day to address what I'm doing, why I'm doing it. I'm waiting maybe a week in between because I have to. Like, I have to. I can't come to them with problems that I don't have solutions for or that I haven't fully worked through or that I don't even know exist yet because I'm like, hey, we decided that we had to pull this out. And now that we pulled that out, I see this as well. And I can't tie into that. And I don't know what I'm going to do. So a lot of times I've somewhat learned and adapted on this project where it's like, normally I would go right to them as soon as I uncovered it and say, here's the issue. Here's how much time I think it's going to take. This is what I think it's going to cost. Are we good to move forward? And right now it's like, I'll go 3 days, I'll go 5, 6 days between doing that because it's like, I'm going to call them 5 times a day because it just keeps changing. So I would say if I could improve on anything right now, it might be communication with the customers, but it's just right now my biggest concern is keeping things moving ahead because at the end of the day, the longer this drags out, the more money it's going to cost. So for me, I'm in my mind, I'm saying I'd rather be putting work in place and moving ahead, telling them what they need to know at this point. And then when I have a second to breathe, following up with them with a meeting or an email saying, here's where we are, here's where we stand, here's the total overages right now on this renovation versus the normal budget. What do you want to do? And I am doing that every couple of weeks, and that's the best that I can do right now. as far as managing this project from a work standpoint, a customer standpoint. Justin, who's working for me, right? Justin took vacation this week, and it's like, is that an ideal time for vacation? No. But when Justin started working for me and told me he wouldn't be here this week, I was like, yeah, I'll be through rough inspections and have my subs there drywalling. So that's not an issue. Like, that works out perfectly. And now it's like, no, that doesn't work out perfectly because I'm in the middle of still continuing to frame and sorting out what's going on structurally and have the engineer involved again. But I can't tell Justin, no, you can't go on vacation now. So juggling all of this is tough. My biggest words of advice to all of you would be to make sure that you communicate, make sure that you continue to put work in place, and that you are trusting of your customers. Your customers trust you. If it's the type of customer where you feel that you need every single change order signed off on before you put work in place, or you have a check in hand to pay for that work before you, whatever you have to do, that there's legalities to consider, but I also, there's a right and a wrong, and there's an urgency, and that's not to say that that may not bite me at some point, but I'm ensuring, and my contract is getting paid every 2 weeks, so like I am managing my risk there. And this is not with regard to this customer whatsoever, so I don't want anyone to think this is how I work in general. Every customer, every single project, this project is unique with how many changes um, that we're experiencing when you look at the overall budget of this project and how far over budget we're going to be. But I need to look at this from a realistic, a practical, and a legal standpoint. But I also need to move ahead with the project. I have to get the people back into their house. I have to get my subs back on my schedule. So my biggest word of advice would be, I think a lot of times with these projects, myself included, you're focusing on the problems, right? The problems get all your attention, and it's like, well, let's shift that some, and then let's not dwell on every issue that we ran into. Let's dwell on how we can fix these, how we can move forward, how we can increase efficiencies to at least salvage some sort of budget and move ahead, give options, give solutions, and not focus on all the negative aspects of this. So that's one. And then two, ensuring that you're communicating with everyone involved with this project, with your employees, with your own family, with your wife, your kids, with the clients, the customers, with the designers, with your subs, your material vendors, as far as, hey, you were set to deliver appliances on this date, it's going to be 5 weeks later. So if we have to get a place to store them, or if you can hold them, or it's going to cost more, I just need to know how that's going to impact budget, impact schedule moving forward, so that I know. So just keep the job moving forward, keep everyone in the loop, have the tough conversations, and know that you're doing all that you can and you're doing what you feel is right. As long as you're not taking advantage of people, taking advantage of customers, employees, subs, vendors, and you're doing the right thing and you've established and maintained that trust with your customers. This is all really difficult, but you're going to get through this. Again, if you have to help your customer secure a loan to be able to continue with this project and they need budgeting for that, sit down and do it. Help them out. Like, put yourself in their position. If you went to go do this done, or say you went to go bring your car to get serviced and there was no life left in this car and you had to buy a new car, like, figure out how to finance that car if you don't have the money to buy a car outright. Be that person who can help your customer through that. Hold their hand, be their liaison, be the trusted professional that they hired to solve the problems. Nobody, myself included, expected to run into what I've ran into on this job. But being the person who can help my customers get through this, not only on the job, but from an emotional and a financial perspective, ensuring that you can help them in any way that they need is really, really important. So that's where I stand with this job. A lot going on. It's been very overwhelming, very stressful. I feel terribly for my customers. They've been fantastic. They really somewhat keep to themselves. They check in if I need anything. They pay me when I invoice them. They want to fix things right. They understand that these are added costs, and it's unfortunate, but they've been nothing but great to work for. So I don't want anyone reading between the lines or thinking that they're reading between the lines and there's been any issues there. There have not. I'm just articulating my concerns and how I've been approaching this job. So um, I hope that this is helpful for you all and this answers a lot of your questions. A lot of people have been reaching out asking how I'm handling this, how my customers are affording this. I don't know. I'm not sure. I don't know their financial health, their financial status. I just want to make sure that they know how much this is costing so that they know what they have to do in order to make this happen. And at the end of the day, when you look at the big picture, and if you have to borrow money, and if it were myself, it'd be something that I would have to borrow money for, and I would figure out how to do that. And that's not an ideal case, but it's what has to happen, and it's something that nobody could have imagined, nobody would have known. So you hope that everyone can keep moving forward and do so in the most efficient and manageable way possible. So I hope you guys enjoyed this podcast. I did. Hop online, give us a review. Thank our sponsors, Anderson, Builder Trend. Keep reposting. If you have any ideas for things you want to talk about, I love getting the emails. All the support has been great. And I'll catch you guys next week. Have a good rest of the week. See ya.